Welcome to the night section. So I'm going to say this. Adam22 has done a lot for this newer generation of artists in hip hop and deserves a lot more credit than he's been given. In recent years, he's been the go-to guy for bubbling artists in the underground scene, while other quote-unquote tastemakers in the game that claim they care for independent artists have only latched onto artists once they've crossed over to the mainstream. I think he's one of the many catalysts, besides the internet and DSPs as an example, to dismantle the barriers of entry for artists to be successful in the music industry. Now, this might be a big claim, but let me explain. And despite what you may think of Adam22 personally, it truly doesn't matter. And just like most things in life that are good for you, they're usually not packaged in a way that you might expect or may even be easy to digest. Like with everything, you have to pay attention to the overarching theme and not nitpick irrelevant details. And what he's done for underground rappers specifically in the last 5 to 6 years with his No Jumper podcast, admittedly, it is too impactful to ignore. Not to mention his brilliance in actually discovering talent, entrepreneurship, and the game of podcasting in general. The No Jumper brand, famously inspired by the one and only Gucci Mane with the song Bricks, is one of the most popular hip-hop podcasts specifically for underground artists in the last couple of years. The No Jumper YouTube channel has close to 4 million subscribers during the recording of this video, with close to 3,500 videos posted to date, and has become the launchpad of many bubbling artists into mainstream waters, including artists like XXXTentacion, Lil Yachty, Trippie Redd, Juice WRLD, and the list goes on. Adam gave a lot of quote-unquote SoundCloud rappers credibility and a platform to a larger audience, especially at a time where a lot of the SoundCloud rappers would be neglected by labels and industry figureheads. Artists would be interviewed on the platform, and literally after a couple weeks or months would all of a sudden be catapulted into stardom. Adam plays the role of the A&R and tries to get in on these artists early, and at this stage of his career, his credibility can no longer come into question, as he has a documented portfolio to prove it. But No Jumper wasn't always the No Jumper it is today. Like with any successful venture, it had its beginnings, and we can trace this back to 2010. In an interview back in 2018 with Fader magazine, where George Potter, his quote-unquote co-founder, and I say quote-unquote because George Potter was there in the beginning, but didn't really contribute to the actual brand that we know today, but this is where George details the birth of No Jumper, and where he says, quote, "I first connected with Adam on Tumblr. He followed me. I remember him telling me he was a big fan of my writing. When I realized I needed funds to do all this, I went to Adam because I saw he was successful with the come up and his own online-ish. Plus, he was a fan of what I was doing. There wasn't ever really a true discussion about ownership. We were supposed to be co-owners and co-founders, which we were at the time, but there was never any paperwork signed or anything. Adam was the financier. He got the website set up and was paying the bills, but otherwise, he didn't really have any involvement in the original No Jumper. He was the co-founder with me, but he was very hands-off. I think he contributed to the site once, which was a video interview with Riff Raff." End quote. Adam was also asked to comment, and his iteration at the beginning was a little different, in where he basically confirms that they did connect on Tumblr, but what had actually happened was that Adam himself was looking to start a hip-hop blog, as he already had experience running his BMX blog. He liked the writing that George was doing at that time, and both agreed that George would become the editor. And again, as George described, Adam did fund the whole operation, including buying the URL. But obviously George abandoned the whole thing after a couple months, in which I assume was because he wasn't getting paid yet. So the whole blog thing was shelved. Adam then explains that essentially a couple years later, he wanted to use the name No Jumper for his podcast, and as courtesy asked George if it was okay to use. And note guys, that Adam really didn't have to because he basically owned everything. And according to Adam, George didn't have a problem. So the lesson here, folks, is if you start anything with anyone, please sign some paperwork. And if you abandon the project in its preliminary stages, don't try to take credit after you see that it becomes a success. But moving on, fast forward to the beginnings of the No Jumper podcast, The idea was actually to start a BMX podcast. And if you guys don't know this already, but prior to anything related to No Jumper, Adam was heavily involved in the BMX scene. He's been riding BMX since he was 13, growing up in New Hampshire. At that time, it was really just the cool thing to do. He didn't take it seriously in terms of being a pro by any means. He had just a genuine love and passion for it, which led him to eventually start a BMX website and a brand called The Come Up.
And that was what was kind of crazy about it, was with The Come Up is it just exploded so fast, and I was so young, I was only 22, and within maybe like a year and a half of starting it, it was like clearly the biggest BMX website that everybody was looking at every day. Nobody believed in me, and I had to fucking make something happen because...
At only 22 years old, Adam created a name for himself in the BMX world, with his main mission being to paint a different picture of the perception of BMXing and show people that you can create a business around your passion, and would dedicate the next several years to that vision. In an interview back in 2016, where his friends actually interviewed him on the No Jumper podcast, he described that the experience in the BMX world would become vital to dealing with rappers in the music industry, meaning you can't just pull up on people if they talk bad about you. In short, he learned his lesson. With BMX being his main focus for at least a decade, it makes sense why he originally wanted to start a BMX podcast. But after interviewing underground rapper and friend Xavier Wolf on his The Come Up TV podcast and the success of that interview compared to the BMX interviews he was doing, he decided to branch out and have a separate podcast that would be non-BMX related, because he had multiple interests outside of BMX, which obviously included hip-hop. And that podcast is what we know as No Jumper today. His first ever interview on the No Jumper podcast was uploaded on June 5th of 2015, which is still available on the No Jumper YouTube page. And this interview was with Ryan Dennehy, an entrepreneur in the tech space. The second interview he ever did on No Jumper was with Ain't Nobody Cool, a fashion group. I guess the idea from then on was to leverage his past guests to get newer ones and newer connections across fields and keep piggybacking off of each guest to eventually get to the point of popularity he's at today. But of course, at the beginning, it was easier said than done. Adam explains he was sending out emails to a bunch of people and would get rejected time and time again, but nonetheless kept going, and his persistence proved to be fruitful, and today has one of the bigger platforms on YouTube. But I would say his actual come up in the podcasting game was during the SoundCloud era of hip hop, which really catapulted around the early to mid 2010s, but started to fizzle out in more recent times. But these were the days, I would say, from 2015 to 2018, where he really started interviewing a lot of quote-unquote SoundCloud rappers, or either have them just make guest appearances on his platform. And it included everyone from XXXTentacion and Ski Master Slump God, to Lil Peep, Wi-Fi's Funeral, Lil Yachty, Lil Xan, Smoke Perp, Ugly God, and so on and so forth. And what's interesting about this is that it was almost as if this was an equal exchange. Yes, Adam did have a growing platform and gave these artists a lot of exposure, but him even interviewing these artists on the come up, it would have their fan bases flock to his platform, adding new fans and subscribers, in turn also benefiting him in the long run. I looked at his most viewed videos of all time, and in the top 5 is XXXTentacion's interview with over 60 million views today, which I believe was one of XXXTentacion's first ever. This proves in a lot of ways that the No Jumper podcast had its real come up with a lot of the SoundCloud rappers he put on the platform, but also how great a platform No Jumper is for bubbling artists to get their name out there. All in all, give Adam22 his flowers. His come up is probably the most authentic I've seen in a very long time, and he's put in a lot of work for the hip-hop culture, especially for the young guys and girls out there. And that's all from me, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to subscribe and engage about anything you like throughout this video. As well, please leave a like, it really does help, and hit the bell notification if you do want to see more. Night section out.